I have said more than a few times in the past that I try not to use this show as an avenue to tell you how to live or even give guidance to you on how to live. This week, though, I can assure you that this is advice that everyone should take. This week we're going to head over to Australia, and we're going to talk about a case where a man went above and beyond and insane in the way that he chose to attempt to convince his girlfriend that they should have sex, get engaged, and ultimately get married. Hello, and welcome to episode 166 of GBNF, The Curious Case of Julian Buchwald. This week's case takes place in 2008 in Australia, and the two people at the center of the story are a young woman named Carolyn Watson and her boyfriend at the time, Julian Buchwald. Julian was a 22-year-old young man, and Carolyn was a 17-year-old young woman. Julian worked as a timber logger, and Carolyn was a high school student. Both Julian and Carolyn lived with their parents, and they had met at the church that they both attended. By 2008, they had already been dating for a couple of years. Before we really even get into the meat and potatoes of this story, you can already tell that this one is perhaps a little weird. While to many, 22 and 17 may be on the fringe of an age difference in the scheme of things, it puts things into perspective that when they first started dating, Julian and Carolyn were around 20 and 15 years of age. Those are two massively different points of life, in my mind at least. That's a certifiable adult dating someone who is in grade 10. Right from the beginning, I'm sure that there are red flags as we dive into this case. As does often happen within churches, after these two had been dating for over 2 years, everyone started to whisper and talk and spread rumors and ask questions about marriage between Carolyn and Julian, and that included, of course, the couple themselves. The couple were devout Christians, and they had resolved to the fact that they would not have sex before they were married. But as time went on, and partially because of the difference in age, I would assume, it started to become a contentious issue between the pair. The two actually met with their pastor of their church to discuss things, and he actually made the suggestion that the two take a break from one another for a month in order for cooler heads to prevail a little bit about the issues of marriage, sex, and everything else within the relationship. Carolyn had told Julian, you see, that she wanted to finish her high school before she focused on anything else, and frankly, who can blame her? During the break, the pair were to spend time looking introspectively and working on themselves, and it seems that they certainly did in some form or fashion. Seemingly, as we will break down as we go here, both Julian and Carolyn came back into the relationship with fresh ideas on how they wanted to and how they saw their relationship progressing. After the month was over, Julian asked for permission from Carolyn's parents to take her out on March 4th, 2008 on a picnic on property that was owned by Julian's parents. The plan was for the two of them to spend time planting trees and walking to have lunch alongside a waterfall that was on the property. The property that Julian's parents owned was rural and remote and mostly bushland. The land was massive. It actually covered 500 hectares, which is the equivalent of 5 kilometers or 2 miles squared. Everyone was told that the couple would return from their picnic around 3 p.m. that afternoon. The pair left for the picnic with only the clothing on their backs and the food that they intended to eat for said picnic. Along the route to the waterfall, Julian said that he had seen some roadkill on the side of the road, and so he pulled the car over and he wanted to check it out. This was not out of the ordinary for Julian, as he did have a strange fascination with looking at roadkill. Julian got out of the vehicle and walked back the short distance to where he said he had seen the roadkill, and Carolyn stayed inside of the vehicle. While Julian was gone, Carolyn waited about 10 minutes before she started to wonder what was taking Julian so long. It was unordinary for him to be gone for so long when he went to look at roadkill, as usually he would stop for a quick look and then return to the car. About the time that Carolyn started to think about getting out of the car herself to go and check on Julian, she looked in the side view mirror and she saw a person approaching the vehicle, but she really quickly realized that it was not Julian. The person approaching the car was dressed head to toe in black and also wearing a balaclava and gloves to ensure that they were covered up completely. Before Carolyn could make the decision to lock the door, the masked man ran to the car and opened the door and dragged her out of the car. Carolyn was then thrown to the ground, and the assailant quickly tied her up, hog-tied her, covered her mouth with duct tape, and then threw her back into the car, this time into the back seat. And the assailant quickly got into the driver's seat of the car and started to drive. Carolyn, of course, believed that the absolute worst was going to happen as the assailant drove. She believed that this man had intentions of raping her and killing her. The drive actually went on for quite some time, nearly 6 hours, until the assailant stopped the car, we would later find out, at the Buchan Headwaters Wilderness area, where Carolyn was again dragged out of the car and again thrown to the ground. Carolyn, of course, was still bound and could not scream or move. Carolyn then heard the sound that confirmed all of her worst fears. She heard the assailant pull out a knife, and she was certain that she was going to lose her life. Meanwhile, back at Julian's family home, his parents were starting to get concerned when the couple did not arrive back at the agreed-upon time. It was out of character for the couple to be late, and Julian's mom continued to get increasingly worried and started to pace back and forth up and down the driveway, looking down the road for any sign of Julian, Carolyn, or their vehicle. But she did not see anything. It was during this period of time that she noticed something, however. She noticed that there was a bottle that had been shoved into their fence, and there was a piece of paper hanging out of the bottle. Julian's mom grabbed the bottle and unraveled the paper, and she was instantly stricken with fear and scared to death for her son and his girlfriend. The note said, "You bloody couldn't leave us alone, so your son and girl went walkabout. You get Carolyn and Julian back when we finish our business in the area, but only if you behave yourself and don't shit us around again. Tell everyone that they are on holiday. Don't you dare talk to the cops again, and you'll get your kids back. Shit us again, and you'll never see them again, because we'll fuck the girl to death and burn her alive, and the bloody boy will really enjoy the torture and sacrifice to our God to pay back 180 hurts that he did to us when we picked him up. This is your last warning. Do what we say, and the kids come back in alive condition." I've pondered this type of scenario over and over inside of my head so many times while researching cases like this one, and I always wonder, what would you do in that situation? It has to run through your mind to not call the police when you're told not to, but how impossible is that in a situation like this? You receive a note telling you that essentially your child will be killed if you contact police, and yet, do you rely on the word of someone who has already kidnapped your child? This is a situation that's scary on an entirely different level as far as I'm concerned, because if you make the wrong choice in that situation, depending on how things turn out, you may not only lose your child, you may live the rest of your life wondering if you made the wrong choice. I can do nothing but feel for anyone who's ever been in a situation like this one, or anything even remotely close. There are certainly no right answers, and there are no wrong answers. Julian's mother did the only thing that I truly think at the end of the day you can do. She immediately called the police and reported that her son and Carolyn were missing, and there were threats made against them inside of a letter that she had in her possession. It goes without saying that the threats inside of that letter were incredibly severe, and as you would expect, the police did take the threats and the situation very seriously. Everyone was immediately on high alert. A very large search party was put together in very short order, and that included people searching on the land, through the brush, and the forest, and also through the air, as everyone knew that the large area that they needed to cover was also incredibly difficult terrain. The land was covered in bush and dirt roads and hidden roads, and the entire area was essentially overgrown with wildlife and with nature. You can only imagine that the combination of a difficult search area and a note threatening the two young lives led to everyone believing that they were on the hunt for a psychopath or psychopaths that were in possession of the couple. While the search was being conducted, investigators were working very diligently to try to figure out just who they might be dealing with. The first avenue was, of course, to look into whether the Buchwalds had ever had trouble with anyone in the past. The letter was very clearly stating that there had been issues in the past between they and the kidnappers, but the family claimed that they had no idea who was behind this letter. They said that they had never had any sort of problems with anyone along the lines that the letter was clearly insinuating. When investigators spoke with Carolyn's family, though, they quickly found out that her family had also received a letter that appeared to have come from the same person or group of people. They had received their letter 10 days earlier when Carolyn's father found the letter on their front porch. That letter essentially said that they should mind their own business and they should stay away, or the writer was going to make their lives a living hell. The writer said that if they didn't mind their own business, they would destroy their entire family. Their letter also said that Christians were the enemies. Carolyn's father had reported the letter immediately to the police when he found it on his front porch, but they had chalked the letter up as a sick prank that was directed at them because of their Christian faith. When comparing the two letters, though, Carolyn's father and investigators immediately noted that the handwriting on both were a complete match, and there was also a symbol on both letters that was a satanic symbol, and the symbol for the ONA, the Order of Nine Angles. The ONA is a satanic cult that was known to preach about human sacrifice. Everything seemed to line up, because obviously Julian and Carolyn were both Christians, and the investigators feared that the letters showed that the kidnappers would likely follow through on their threats and would make human sacrifices of Julian and Carolyn. The search itself was proving fruitless. After 48 hours of searching, investigators were not any closer to finding any physical evidence. There were no signs of the couple and no signs that they had even been anywhere that they were searching. The reality was that the investigators were searching the wrong place, of course. They were looking on the property that was owned by the Buchwald family, when the reality was that Julian and Carolyn were nowhere near there any longer. Police interviewed the pastor of the church that the couple had attended, hoping that he might be able to add to the investigation, especially into the satanic cult angle. They hoped that he might be able to shine some light onto who may have sent those letters and who was behind the kidnapping. The reality, though, was much different. The pastor told investigators that he did not believe that the satanic cult angle was correct at all. He believed instead that the couple hadn't even been kidnapped, but instead had run away together to get married. The pastor told investigators that Carolyn and Julian were strict and devout Christians, and as such they had held steady that they wanted to wait until marriage before having sex. Their relationship, he said, had in fact not moved beyond hand-holding in the 2 years that they had been together. The pastor told investigators that he had met with the couple recently, and he said that Julian had indeed been pushing harder and harder for Carolyn and he to get married sooner rather than later, and that Carolyn had been resisting the idea. He said that the only thing that didn't jive with his belief that they may have run away together was the letters themselves. He said that based on what he knew about Julian and Carolyn, the language and the imagery in those letters were things that wouldn't have been a part of their usual lexicon. Investigators, though, quickly dismissed that angle. They believed that the runaway theory did not make any sense. The couple hadn't taken anything with them, aside from the clothing on their backs and the food for their picnic, as far as anyone could tell, and their bank accounts had not been accessed, and all of those things led investigators to lean towards the fact that the couple had been going for a picnic and were met with foul play. And so, investigators started to do a deep dive into the ONA. The Order of Nine Angels is a militant, satanic, left-hand, path, occultist, and terrorist network that originated in the United Kingdom but has since branched out into other parts of the world. The ONA claims that it was established in the 1960s, but it rose to public recognition in the early 1980s. The ONA is a diverse and worldwide collective of diverse groups, tribes, and individuals who share and pursue similar sinister, subversive interests, aims, and lifestyles, and who do cooperate when necessary for their mutual benefits and in pursuit of their shared aims and objectives. The criteria for belonging to the ONA in this pursuit is the pursuit of similar, sinister, subversive interests, aims, and lifestyles together, with the desire to cooperate when and only when it's beneficial to them and the pursuit of their shared aims. There is thus no formal ONA membership and no mundane hierarchy or even any rules. It is said to be a fascinating blend of both Hermeticism and traditional Satanism, with some pagan elements, and is considered to be one of the most extreme Satanist groups in the world. The problem that investigators quickly ran into, though, is that they found out that the ONA had actually never existed in Australia. That started to incite fears that this might perhaps be the start of the group on Australian soil, and as such the ONA would want to make a massive impact and send a big message by the kidnapping and human sacrifice of Julian Buchwald and Carolyn Watson. Nearly a week had gone by, and the searchers continued, of course, to come up empty. There were no signs of the couple, and there was no evidence that they had even been in the areas that were being searched. Investigators believed that they were now searching for remains, as there was no way that the couple could have survived the wilderness for that long without anything in terms of supplies. Even if they had somehow survived the kidnapping, the wilderness itself was filled with spiders, snakes, and all types of animals and insects that could have brought them to an early demise if they were left on their own without any protection. For the first time, investigators started to wonder if in fact the letters had been left for both families as a diversion by the kidnappers, to keep investigators spinning their wheels and off their trail, because there were no leads or any sign that the ONA existed in their country. After nearly all hope had been lost of finding either alive, the miraculous happened, and Julian and Carolyn emerged from the woods near Alpine Park 6 days after they had gone missing. They were spotted and picked up by a farmer in the area, and they were very far from where they were supposed to be. Both were covered in cuts and bruises, and they were also sunburnt badly and had blisters all over their bodies. Very quickly after they emerged, even though they were in dire straits, both were interviewed because investigators knew that time was of the essence because the kidnapper or kidnappers were still at large, and neither Julian nor Carolyn knew who they were. Carolyn told investigators that the attacker had cut off her clothing and left her naked, but still tied up. She said that the kidnapper had dug a hole near her, and she believed that she was going to be raped, killed, and buried into that hole that he had been digging. She said that she had started to pray fervently, not knowing what else she could do. She said that she believed that her prayers were answered because her attacker disappeared and did not come back for quite some time, and she believed that her life had been spared. While the attacker was gone, Carolyn said that she heard a voice faintly and realized that it was Julian's voice. She cried out for him, and he yelled back to her, saying that it was him, and that he too was tied up and naked. When the two found one another, he told Carolyn that he had just awakened after being knocked out. He told her that when he went to look at the roadkill along the road, he had heard footsteps quickly approaching, and then he had been hit in the head, and that was the last thing that he remembered. He said he had blacked out. As the two were talking, Julian noticed that there was a knife that had been left where they were, and with the help of Carolyn, the two managed to cut themselves free of their bindings, and they saw that the attacker had also left behind a sleeping bag and a few morsels of food that had been meant for their picnic. Both were terrified, and she said that they didn't know if the attacker was going to come back, and so they grabbed the food and the sleeping bag and ran off, still completely naked. She said that they both expressed that they believed that they would be tracked and killed, but they needed to make some attempt at getting away. The two would then traverse the area, and they tried to find a way out of the wilderness. Carolyn said that they noticed after a few days that they had accidentally come full circle, and that they had come back near to the site that they had been left tied up. They feared that that of course would mean that even though they had tried to put space between them and their attacker, he may in fact be close by. While checking out near the site, though, Julian had found the bag that they had taken on the day of the picnic, and their clothing was inside of it. They were able to, after days of being naked in the wilderness, get dressed and at least partially protect themselves from the elements. A few days after that was when they finally found the road, and the farmer found them. Investigators were able to use what Carolyn told them, and of course the location that they were located, to try and triangulate where the kidnapper had taken the couple. And they knew that they needed to find that exact spot that Carolyn spoke of, because the investigators believed that there would be a great deal of evidence there, of course. After a lot of searching, they did find the site, and they found bits of clothing, the knife, the shovel, and some duct tape to corroborate what they knew of the story. The evidence was processed and studied, and thankfully, the investigators were able to identify the person that owned everything that was found on the site, and that was truly a stroke of good luck for the investigation. The person that owned all of the items, though, was hard to believe. Everything belonged to Julian Buchwald. Investigators didn't know what to make of that news and didn't know what was going on. Either the kidnapper had somehow managed to gather items that belonged to Julian and didn't bring anything else to the scene, or something else was afoot. Issues started to come up also with the entire story that was coming out, and one of the main ones was that Julian had some problems with the story that he had told Carolyn and to investigators. One of the main problems was that when he had been attacked, he said he had been hit in the head so hard that he had been knocked out and had not come to for at least 6 hours, which was the distance between the two locations. The problem was that Julian only had one mark on his head, and it was barely visible, and did not look anything like the type of mark that would be left by such a blow. Police started to look at a new angle. They started to investigate whether there was a chance that Julian had somehow been involved with the kidnapping of he and Carolyn. Investigators eventually went to Julian and told him that they wanted the truth. They told him that they did not believe anything that he had told them, and they told him that his story was not adding up. They said that they believed that everything was a lie, and they told him that it was indeed time to come clean, and he did. It didn't take long for Julian to crack under the pressure when he realized that he couldn't talk himself out of his situation. He made full admissions to the police that not only had he been a part of what had happened, it had all been him. He said that he had kidnapped Carolyn, and he had faked his own kidnapping. He showed investigators where he had stashed all of his supplies in preparation, and he lied about seeing the carcass on the road. He said that when he had gone to investigate the carcass, what he had actually done was get changed and turned into the kidnapper that Carolyn had seen. He then drove Carolyn to the Headwaters Wilderness area where Carolyn and he, quote-unquote, woke up. Julian told investigators that Carolyn had begged him to stop and pleaded for her life throughout the entire ordeal, and he then detailed how he left her, took off his own clothes, tied himself up, and made it look like they had both been victims of the same kidnapper. So, if you're sitting there and listening to the sound of my voice, you're likely asking yourself, why on earth would he do all of this? What could possibly be the motive? He didn't want to kill his girlfriend. He didn't want to rape his girlfriend. They had been together for a long time. What would lead this man to kidnap his girlfriend, take her into the wilderness, and then suffer alongside her for a week from hell? What on earth could possibly possess a man to do such a thing? Well, the reason was that Julian wanted Carolyn to have sex with him, and he wanted her to marry him, and he did not want to wait until she finished high school. Julian was quite possibly the stupidest and frankly horniest man in the history of the world. He believed that through this entire ordeal he would be able to convince her, through fear mind you, to cave on her beliefs and cave on finishing school, and instead fall into his plans and his way of thinking. On numerous occasions, while lost in the wilderness, Julian had tried to persuade Carolyn to have sex with him, because he said they were going to die. He said they should have sex for warmth, and frankly, he gave any reason he could possibly think of. He had even tried to tell her that in light of their circumstances and the fact that they were probably going to die, they should just announce their marriage in the eyes of God. He said that God would understand. Carolyn refused the marriage and the sex every single time. Julian also told investigators that he was never lost. He said that he pretended to be lost the entire time, but he knew where he was. He kept pretending because he believed that at some point Carolyn would crack and break down. He finally gave up, and that was when he led them out of the wilderness begrudgingly, because he realized that Carolyn was not going to break down and give in to his whims. In the end, Julian was charged with unlawfully carrying away against one's rule. He was charged with abduction with intent to marry, abduction for sexual penetration, and theft. In court, it was presented that Carolyn had suffered severe injuries to her neck, her back, and her hands because of the assault, the confinement, and the time in the sun. And of course, she had taken an immeasurable amount of mental abuse that she probably will never recover from. One can only imagine, first of all, what it must have been like for her to believe that she was going to lose her life at the hands of her kidnapper and have to struggle through that. And then, how much worse that must have been when the truth finally came out, and she found out that the attack and the kidnapping had actually been done by her supposed true love, Julian. I cannot even begin to understand that kind of mental torment. Julian was found guilty in 2009, but not immediately sentenced, and he was allowed out on bail until his sentencing hearing. He, however, did what I suppose you would suspect from a stupid criminal, and he tried to avoid prison time by fleeing the country. The way that he did it, though, was as crazy maybe as the entire kidnapping plot. He paid for a new identity, an Indian identity. He tanned himself numerous times with fake tan until the tint of his skin changed, and then he dyed his eyebrows and his hair darker to fit the persona. He did manage to get out of the country. He flew to Singapore, but was arrested when he landed when his true identity was found. He was deported back to Australia and then sentenced to 7 years and 3 months for the ordeal with Carolyn and an additional 6 months for skipping the country. One has to wonder why he was so intent on trying to avoid jail time. I'm sure that he could find all of the sex that he ever wanted in there. That was not the end for Julian, though. He found himself in more hot water in 2014 when his citizenship was called into question, as the Immigration and Border Protection Department said that his permanent residency was under review. You see, Julian was not an Australian citizen. He had been born in Germany and moved to Australia when he was only 1 year old, but he had never applied for his Australian citizenship. And so, it was deemed that when his time was served, he was going to be deported to Germany. Julian tried to fight that deportation by showing that he had job offers for when he was released from prison, and he had a spotless record before his kidnapping ploy. And he said his entire life, his entire family, and all of his friends were in Australia. Those pleas were rejected, and in 2016, Julian was put onto a plane and sent to Germany. And that is where this story ends. Julian came up with this incredibly stupid plan to try and convince his girlfriend to sleep with him and marry him, and instead, he single-handedly caused irreparable damage to her life that she likely will never completely overcome. He lost her. He went to jail, and now he's been shipped to Germany, a place he has never lived and had no experience in. Truly a terrible trade, in contrast to the, year or two perhaps that he needed to wait for Carolyn based on the trajectory at the time. As we come to close another episode, I pray that you know that thoughts and actions like this one are not a part of being better. I hope that this episode finds you and yours well, and that you are continuing to ensure the betterment of the world around you. If you enjoy the podcast, please jump onto socials with us, or better yet, sign up over at patreon.com/GBNF True Crime, and sign up to support the show for all kinds of perks, including early shows, ad-free shows, and so much more. Thank you for listening to another episode of Gone But Never Forgotten, and I will see you all back here again next week.